Konnichiwa.
Welcome to the Jandals in Japan podcast.
Hey, Catherine, how's it going?
Hi, Jane. Going well. How about you?
Yeah, we're surviving the summer here in Fukushima. What have you got planned for your summer?
Ooh, actually, that's a little bit of a tough question. I'm probably going to be lying quite low, which sounds very boring, I know, but I'm planning to go away in the sort of September, Silver Week, supposedly Silver Week holidays. And I've got a friend getting married during that time too. So I'm kind of holding myself for September when it's still pretty warm.
Right, that'd be nice.
But yeah, not really taking time off in August as such. Just probably going to do some couple of work projects. Gosh, that sounds boring, doesn't it? When it's all blazing hot outside. But I'm kind of not very good with the heat, so I'm good inside. Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to go somewhere, but the thought of going places when it's really hot does not thrill me either.
I know. I just don't like feeling hot the whole time.
Yeah. But we do have another trip planned, don't we? Coming up in November.
We do.
Down to Kyushu. So you'll hear a little bit more about that trip in this episode that we're about to play. But also, Kyushu's been in the news since yesterday, was it? Yesterday? Yeah.
Yeah. And so in Kyushu, there's this prefecture called Kagoshima Prefecture. It's known for many things like beef, I think is one of their exports that they have throughout Japan.
Onsen. Tsunaburo, the baths, sand baths.
The sand baths,
sweat
that's
in
right.
the sand baths. That sounds not my cup of tea.
Yes. And the other thing, obviously, when you get onsen, you have to have volcanoes, and that's Sakurajima. Is it Cherry Blossom Island? I'm not sure if that's the direct translation, but Sakurajima in Kagoshima Prefecture blew its top. The volcano did actually erupt. I think it was late on Sunday.
It was quite spectacular by the looks of it.
Yeah, and it's blown 3 times since then. So it just surprises me, Jane, that people live on an island that's got an active volcano like this.
I used to live on an active volcano.
What? Where?
Yeah, Ruapehu in the middle of the North Island. I used to live on there. Yeah, it's active. Yeah, and we had an early warning system.
Oh my goodness.
And we used to practice our evacuations and things. So, but Sakurajima is a whole nother level of active compared to Ruapehu.
I think so. I mean, it was throwing rocks out 2.5 kilometers from the crater. I mean, yeah.
So that's happening over on the other side of Kyushu, whereas we're going to Beppu, which is in Oita Prefecture on the other side of Kyushu. So
well, I hope it clears up and that we can get on with things. But we are pretty much making this a little bit of a Kyushu kind of episode. And that's where we have our guest today, who is Ian Kennedy. And he is connected with the Japan-New Zealand Business Council on the New Zealand side and the head of the New Zealand Committee. And we talk a little bit in this episode about Beppu and the conference that's planned to be held November 20, 21 and 22 this year in 2022.
All right, let's hear from Ian.
Yeah, let's hear from Ian.
Kia ora, Ian. Welcome to Jandals in Japan.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Konnichiwa, Ian. So lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
We have as you know, we have a warm-up question. So our warm-up question for you today is, you are planning a trip to Japan. Would you prefer to arrive at Narita or Haneda?
I guess I have to say Haneda. Not only because it's closest, but because that was the gateway when I first went to Japan. So
really?
Yeah, so Haneda, it was actually through Hong Kong in those days. There wasn't a direct flight. So that was 1978, 79.
Okay, yeah. So it would have been a very different Japan to what we know today. How about you, Catherine? Narita or Haneda?
I have to side with Ian there on Haneda. It's, of course, very convenient to get to New Zealand through Narita, yes. But for all of my non-family fun trips out of Japan, when I've gone to Italy or Spain, it's always been Haneda. And some of my fun business trips when I went to Germany or went to Sweden and Denmark, they were all out of Haneda. And it gives me a vibe of fun, Haneda. And I love zipping around there. It seems just so much easier to get through.
Yeah. Well, I'm firmly in the Narita camp, and that is because I can drive my car all the way there from my house here in Fukushima to Narita quite smoothly these days, whereas trying to get to Haneda is a bit of a nightmare. You get in traffic jams very, very quickly. So for us, it knocks off several hours of travel time if we can drive to
that's
Narita.
really practical, very practical.
Yeah, and all of the luggage stuff, with, kids in tow and suitcases and stuff, just load it all in, and then,
and you just leave your car at the car park.
Yeah. Leave in the long-term car park, and
there we go.
On to, and when I land at Narita, I know I'm back in Japan. That's for sure. Yeah. All righty.
All right. Well, we're so thrilled to have you, Ian Kennedy, as our guest today. You're a former New Zealand ambassador to Japan, and now you're chair of the New Zealand Committee of the Japan-New Zealand Business Council, and we know you're a very, very big golf lover with a pretty good handicap, we hear. And you came up with this idea too of holding a New Zealand Open golf tournament in Queenstown, and hopefully bringing us back to that as borders opening and bringing Japan pro golfers into New Zealand. And so we're looking forward to having you talk, because you're such an experienced old hand, and I don't mean old, I mean experienced veteran of the relationship, and it's just giving us great deep insight. So we're looking forward to having you. So welcome.
Pleasure. I have to say that the golf tournament is not really my idea. I'd love to claim it as my idea, but actually the kudos needs to go to John Hart. The former New Zealand All Blacks coach. Actually, the New Zealand Open has more than 100 years of history, longer history than any golf event in Japan, in fact. Wow. It used to be a struggling New Zealand-Australia professional event, but John Hart actually had the idea to breathe new life into it by creating it as a pro-am event. So nowadays we have 155 amateurs and 155 pros, and 20 of the pros and 20 of the amateurs are from Japan. So it's quite a different event, and the idea of Japan and New Zealand create another bridge between the two countries. Again, on the sort of basis that everything starts with relationships, and nothing is better than sitting around after a golf game and sort of imagining how good you were and forgetting how bad you were, and talking about other things and sort of building links. And that's what it's all about.
Good. But were you the proponent? Were you the person behind bringing the Japan side in? I think you might have been instrumental.
Yeah.
Come on, claim some fame. Come on.
Okay. When I came back from being ambassador in Japan, it was a time of great restructuring of MFAT. I looked around and I just couldn't see any sort of niche that really appealed to me after the job in Japan, which was the one I always wanted anyway. So decided to leave. And then the next day, the foreign minister at the time was Murray McCully, who was also sports minister. And he said to me, why are you leaving? And I so went through that. And he said, well, if you're looking for an ongoing job with Japan, how about talking with John Hart? Because he's just had the idea of recreating the New Zealand Open as a pro-am. And we need someone to, bring in Japanese sponsorship, bring in amateurs, professionals. He knew I played golf a bit, and he said, it could be a job for you. So that's how it happened.
That's also about relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Well, we want to put your whole bio, everything that you've done, into the show notes later on, but tell us about that, getting to your dream job of being ambassador from New Zealand to Japan, and that work that led up to that within New Zealand. Tell us a bit about your background there, because you said you're what did you say, country boy? I don't think.
Yeah, I was really. I grew up in the Waikato in Hamilton. Yeah. My horizon didn't really go much beyond the Waikato, if I'm honest about it. I played a lot of sport. I was age group rep in hockey, cricket, golf, and cross-country running.
Wow,
and
just those.
Oh my goodness.
Only a few.
Study was not such a high priority to me. And anyway, I was going to be a school teacher. And so I qualified with a BA in maths and went off to James Hargest High School in Invercargill.
I know that school. Yes, down in Southland. Yes.
But I sort of looked about 14 years old trying to teach 18-year-olds, and it was never going to work, actually. So I went back to university, and my maths got me a sort of fast track into stage 3 economics and then masters. And then when it came to graduating, I was thinking of Treasury or Reserve Bank primarily. But I was boarding with a family, 2 daughters, and one of them became engaged and married Hugo Judd, who was in Foreign Affairs, one of the deputy secretaries. And he said to me, have you thought of Foreign Affairs? And I hadn't, to be honest. But I applied and I was accepted. I was thinking, I was not actually thinking of a foreign language posting, to be honest. But I was seconded to Treasury for a couple of years, and it was Muldoon time, and it was, it was pretty much what we got at the moment. The economy was not in good shape, and Muldoon was looking for a way to stimulate the economy, and it was his Think Big projects that were the sort of thing. And so Foreign Affairs needed somebody to go to Tokyo to go around the banks and the securities companies to do the yen loans and the bond issues. And so that was my job. So that's why I arrived in Tokyo. I had, I think, 4 weeks of language training in advance, which, would be absolutely fluent at the end of that. But in a way, it was very lucky because I interacted with the international branches and with highly competent people in their trade, but also really good English speakers because I couldn't speak Japanese. So that's a really poor excuse for me, but that was my introduction. So actually one of my closest contacts is Kuroda Haruhiko, who is Bank of Japan governor from those days. He was the Ministry of Finance key person going to all the G7 meetings and so on. So he was absolutely a great friend to me from those days. And I thought, if I'm going to stick with Foreign Affairs, let's try and make it between Japan and New Zealand. That's how it worked out. It wasn't really a planned career at all, but it's opened a whole lot of doors. And I think also you can see in the embassy today, there's more people who are on second and third postings, which I think I was the first to do that. I think that's really good because I know totally with Japan, it's building relationships with a wide group of people so you can pick up the phone to them and you're not starting from scratch, and they sort of know where you're coming from. There's a basis of trust there too, so some things are shared that might not be on a first meeting sort of thing. Cool. So that's how it's come about.
Now you're chair of the New Zealand Committee of JNZBC. There's probably a few people listening who may not know what the Japan-New Zealand Business Council does. So it'd be really good to hear from you, Ian, what, the origin of that and what kinds of activities you do there and how it connects Japan and New Zealand.
Sure. The council started in 1974, so it's long-standing. On the New Zealand side, we'd just lost the preferential access to the UK because the UK had joined the European community. Mm-hmm. And so New Zealand was looking around for new trade partners. Japan was still in the process of rebuilding following the Second World War. So what happened was a New Zealander and a Japanese at the Pacific Basin Economic Council meeting met and said, look, we get along pretty well, but just meeting at PBEC by chance is not good enough. We need a forum that gets together at least once a year so that we build a relationship. And then once we've got that, we can start to be talking seriously about doing trade and business together with each other. So originally the council, I think, was probably about 12 people on each side. And I think, it was a bit of a party. I think, I don't think the meeting room was necessarily the key sort of focus of the activity at those days. From what I hear, but I think some great relationships were sort of built, which was good. So it continued on in that way as sort of a way to get to know each other. And it was pretty much driven by the large companies like the Fletcher Challengers and so on the New Zealand side, and the big forestry companies on the Japanese side, the Sumitomo Forestry, OG Holdings, Wood One, and so on. But when I came back to New Zealand, I was asked to chair the Business Council, which I thought, should I do that or not? Because I really didn't have business experience. I had long experience in government and public service. If we lost the Business Council, we would lose our link into the Japan Chamber of Commerce, one of the big business organizations in Japan. And if we lost that, there would be a major damage to the bilateral trade and economic relationship. I've taken things in the direction that New Zealand needs to work as New Zealand Inc. So we need to know what the MFAT is doing in the embassy and what NZTE are doing and what MB are doing, where those priorities are and where the challenges are that we need to address, and then build understanding through the Business Council. So build the relationship that then opens the door for those challenges to disappear, because we all see actually what we're doing is in our joint interest. So the Business Council these days is, we address things like renewable energy, climate change. Hopefully, we had a first speaker on space cooperation last year. And this year, I hope we can bring together really serious speakers on both sides to talk about collaboration and addressing the problem of waste in space. Also, just ways of responding to health needs in the Japan society by reliable, healthy foods. It's an agenda that is focused definitely on building business links with Japan and New Zealand, but by sort of building from the relationship up. We don't champion an individual company. Rather, what we do is try to raise the level of the profile and the level of awareness in Japan of what New Zealand can bring to the table in various sectors, whether it's renewable energy or hydrogen, geothermal, food production, a whole range of things, space, the whole works, construction using wood. So that's the sort of agenda that we want to bring to the business table for our meeting, which will be in Beppu on the 20th and 22nd of November.
That's very exciting. So for people who are listening and they're like, well, this sounds really great, but I don't think we could join.
Just to give you a couple of examples of companies that are not big, but they are big in their ambition and the way they think. From Tauranga, it's a company called Robotics Plus. Why did I forget that? Robotics Plus. It is basically has drawn its staff from graduates of Massey University. Look, there may be some women there, so I'm not disparaging them, but my impression is sort of guys that could sort of prop the All Black scrum. These are well-built guys that have lots of experience on the farm, and so they know the business, but they're also seriously smart with, so PhDs in engineering and physics and you name it. They have constructed this company that is building all these robots with agriculture, forestry applications. Through their relationship building, they met with Yamaha Motor, the arm in Silicon Valley in the United States, very interested in agriculture with lots of land in the United States. So good for robots. And so Robotics Plus have said, well, we can work with you to develop robots to harvest apples, for example. And they don't just harvest them; they put them in the box with the best side up and uniform sizes and so on. And they're working on similar stuff for grapes and other fruit. But they've also developed a scanner where, in the past, some poor individual had to clamber on the back of a logging truck and, get a tape rule out and measure the diameter of the log and then the length and then calculate the volume. And that led to all sorts of problems when the logs arrived at the other end, because no log is uniform. And so the guesstimate of the volume was not going to be the same as the actuality. So nowadays, they just go through a scanner through the ports in New Zealand, and in about 5 minutes, what used to take a long time, the measurement is absolutely accurate. So it's a case of a small company with really advanced technology and smarts being able to help a major Japanese corporate in Yamaha Motor. And I can see the same, with a little company called Kogo. They've developed an application that enables a company to measure its carbon footprint. So it doesn't matter what company it is, it will have a carbon footprint. And then they can, having measured the carbon footprint, they can also give advice on how to reduce it. But then that's going to cost money. So the third leg of the tripod, or whatever you call it, is banks that will provide green loans. And so that's the role that the council has been able to make in introducing Kogo to major banks in Japan, who are now sort of talking with them about how they can make that triangle, banks, companies, Kogo, to reduce the carbon footprint of a company in its production, which, everybody is going to be looking for now when you buy a product and saying, well, how much damage is this doing to the environment? And so that's the sort of thing we can do. So the more that we can get companies join the business council, and our rates are very reasonable. I mean, seriously reasonable.
How reasonable are we talking?
Look,
let's say some numbers.
Look, okay, for a small company with less than 50 employees, about $450 a year. For a large company, about I think it's just over 2,000.
Right.
It really is not very much, and all our events during the course of the year in New Zealand are free of charge. So we've got the Minister of Trade speaking in August about his visit to Japan. We're going down to Christchurch. You'll be pleased to know, Catherine.
Thank you, Ian.
We've got Christchurch Airport talking about what they're doing to reduce their carbon footprint. And then we've got a dinner prior to the conference in September in Auckland with Alan Bollard, the chairman of the Infrastructure Commission, talking about the pipeline of major projects coming up in New Zealand. So these are all chances for companies on the New Zealand side to meet others on the New Zealand side and talk about what they do and share information and so on. So, we definitely welcome the big players, because the big players will be of primary interest to Japanese counterparts, but the small players can also find niches in Japan, no doubt about it. One of the most fascinating things that we do at the Business Council meeting, and we'll do it again in Beppu, is to have a New Zealand breakfast and go around the room and ask everybody to talk for 2 or 3 minutes about what they do. And you find out a whole lot of interesting stuff that you didn't know was going on between Japan and New Zealand, but also just the potential for linkages, particularly with COVID. There's been a long period where people have had to sort of live in their own bubble. So the more that we can get interaction, without interaction and without relationships, you're not going to make progress in Japan. That's my theme song forever and a day.
So people can join JNZBC and do the lead up with all of these events and attend the conference in Beppu and certainly we're thinking of coming along and seeing what's what. And also, I think Japan side was thinking of doing something here in Tokyo before going down to Beppu as well. So there's going to be a lot of energy and things bubbling up here, right? And as you just said, the big players, but also we've got these smaller players who are finding these big opportunities.
Definitely.
So it's a good thing, isn't it? That's something, isn't it? We often hear is that Japan is hard. What do you think about that, Ian? I mean, is it as hard as people say? Can we bust a myth here?
Can be hard. Can be hard. But I think New Zealand can be hard.
What's the key? New Zealand can be hard as well. What's the key to success then in Japan?
I think it's networking. You got to do it. If you rush into it, you're going to find sort of more haste, less speed. I think in the case of Japan, it does really pay to take things steadily and step by step and talk with people a lot, because people are willing to share their knowledge. They really are.
We've heard recently that Japan is not such a priority market potentially for New Zealand businesses. What do you think about that?
I think we've turned a corner. I do, big time. A number of things. I mean, I think the sort of Russia-Ukraine issue plays into people's concerns about the international environment. Certainly, China's recent approaches into the Pacific make people think. At the same time, Japan has been such a steady partner. The challenge is that Japanese companies like to fly under the radar. They don't generally. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what the sort of PR budget is of major Japanese corporates, but I don't think it's very large. And so people don't know, for example, that the former Bank of Tokyo, MUFG Bank, has been in New Zealand for 52 years. They don't know that Sumitomo Forestry, OG Holdings, JTB, Wood One, Mitsubishi have all been in New Zealand for 50 years plus and have huge experience about New Zealand. And in their head offices, there's a number of people who've been in the country and think well about the country. And so there's this real reservoir of good feeling towards New Zealand. So somehow we need to get Japan's profile up a bit more. And what we're planning for the Business Council meeting, and Catherine, I'm actually edging towards seeing if you might chair this item at the Business Council in Beppu. But what we're thinking of is maybe we can get 2 or 3 people from New Zealand companies with long experience in the Japanese market, and vice versa, Japanese companies with long experience in the New Zealand market. And as a way to commemorate 70 years of diplomatic relations, ask them to speak for maybe 2-3 minutes each on milestones in the relationship. What's happened that was really amazing in that time, or what surprised them about Japan or New Zealand? And what can we learn from that sort of reservoir of experience from those senior leaders? Why do they stick with us for 50 years? I mean, and similarly, why are New Zealand companies in Japan? And just as an opener, to bring out some of the, the really nuggets of the trade and economic relationship. And so, Catherine, just brace yourself. I'm thinking you would be a great chairperson of that item at the start of the conference.
You heard it here first. It would be a privilege, of course. I would love to help you on that.
But what do you think?
Sounds like a great idea, yes. And I mean, why have they stuck together? They could have gone elsewhere. It's a very good question. And I think it's really important to signify that 70 years of diplomatic relations. And underneath that, or on top of that, we've got this 50 years of business relations. Let's call it out. And it will really set the tone, I think, for the conference. What a great idea.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think also, just to go back to Jane's question, I mean, we're sort of seeing now, I mean, under Prime Minister Abe in his time, leadership in bringing Japan into TPP, in fact, giving life to TPP. Without him, it wouldn't have happened. And now we're seeing the US sort of looking to Indo-Pacific, again, piggybacking on a proposal that the Prime Minister Abe had in his time. So a much more focus on our region. And that, I think, is sort of course, China is in our region as well. But I mean, Japan, we talk about common values and shared interests, and it sounds a bit like diplomatic speak, but it's very real with Japan. And I think this is the time that we really need to be working closely together. We've got a great opportunity to do it. And there's sort of a groundswell that we should be doing more between Japan and New Zealand. There was that time when I think the focus went off the relationship a bit, but I think it's much more on now. And, certainly during COVID, even, we've seen the membership on the New Zealand side of the Business Council expand. And when I started in 2012, we had about 30 members. We've now got 72, and it's growing. Companies like Beppu, companies like Rocket Lab, Contact Energy. There's a whole lot of big name companies, as well as the smaller ones, and the accounting firms and the lawyers and so on.
And to the extent possible, they'll be coming through with representatives. Do you think through the November Beppu conference? We hope so. We'd love to see them.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think there's a lot of folk that have really missed the interaction over the last 2 or 3 years.
For sure.
So it's a chance. Yeah.
And is there something about those companies being Kiwi that makes them they've got a real X factor that works with Japan? And it ties into what you're saying there with the people with the longer term relationships. But some of these newer companies, what is their X factor? What is it that makes them successful as Kiwis or Jandals in Japan, do you think?
I think a factor of New Zealand's isolation. I mean, I don't actually like the number 8 wire, because I think that sort of paints us a little bit, doing well with what we can sort of thing. But I think it's much more to New Zealand companies these days. There's some serious smarts out there in IT and all the sort of modern technology that I struggle to keep up with. But I'm amazed by it at the same time, just what New Zealand companies can do. I mean, I think Robotics Plus and Kogo are sort of prime examples, but, we don't pretend to have the international reach or international contacts that the Japanese have. But we do seriously believe that we can bring new thoughts to the table that maybe might not rise so naturally in Japan. I think, in New Zealand, one of the sort of attractive features of New Zealand to young people is that you can actually progress quite fast based on talent and doing hard work. I think in Japan you can progress, absolutely, but it takes longer. You've got to do your time at certain levels, and generally speaking, you sort of rise with your cohort much more than in New Zealand, where an individual, by sort of being particularly outstanding, can actually rise very fast and sort of bring bring a group of very talented people around them and have something amazing to offer. I think that's what New Zealand brings to the table. That's the X factor. But I also think the other X factor is we're really strong on relationships. I mean, New Zealanders, that's something we have in common with Japan, that we do actually value personal relationships. And, people are important in New Zealand. I mean, I think, we're seeing that really with the sort of renaissance and the Maori culture values in New Zealand, that, hey, this is something that we really need to treasure in New Zealand. It's all about sort of, again, it's relationships and people. And, just in the same way as I was saying before, I don't hesitate to reach out to you or others in Japan if I think it would be good to link up a New Zealander. I'm not sure if that's a characteristic of other societies, other cultures, but I think it is a New Zealand one, that if we, we do think it makes sense to bring people together. I think also New Zealanders are pretty respectful of Japanese culture too. They can see that's got value, and they're keen to understand it and to, sort of be respectful in Japanese culture as well. So I think there's a lot going for New Zealand that it just speaks of the people that we are as a country.
Nice, yeah. I think, you hit it there. New Zealanders are very interested to know and learn about Japanese culture. What are some of the pitfalls that you see people falling into potentially, or that's something that comes to mind that you would love to tell our listeners about? You haven't had a chance.
Yeah. Look, it's a hard one. Not trying to sort of push the pace too much.
Right.
Give people time to reflect.
Yeah.
It's tough for New Zealand companies, especially small ones, because they don't have a lot of capital, and so they're looking for results. But it's important not to be too transactional on a first meeting. To just spend a bit of time. I always tell people, make sure you have your Japanese name, a name card in Japanese to hand to your Japanese visitors, and also when you get their Japanese name card, spend a bit of time on it. Don't just sort of have a quick glance and sort of put it in your pocket. I mean, that's a bit discouraging to the Japanese. I mean, even if you don't understand the Japanese, the Chinese, the kanji, ask them a bit about it and say, and then, sort of their prefecture, and sort of ask what's the special feature of their prefecture, and spend that time. That in New Zealand, maybe it would look like sort of small talk and waste of time, but actually it's not a waste of time at all. And I tell them, at Christmas time or Easter, or if you can remember it, or Bon, don't hesitate to send a one-line email just saying, hope you're doing well, something like that. Doesn't have to be a long message. Just keep keep the relationship going, especially when you might only be able to visit once a year. Don't hesitate to pull out the old family photos. I mean, you probably wouldn't do that in New Zealand, but Japanese just want to know who you are, what your values are, where you come from. And so that's what I'd say to don't rush to business. And certainly, I think just related to that, don't think that because you've got a product that's a whiz in New Zealand, it's necessarily going to be a whiz in Japan. In that sort of getting to know them, find out a bit about the market and, what they're looking for, so that when you come to be talking about business, you're talking about what they want, what they're looking for, not what you've got to sell. I remember when I first went to Japan, and you go into the supermarkets and you'd see the legs of lamb in the bottom of the refrigerator or freeze, just gathering ice, because nobody knew what to do with them, and they thought if I put them in my oven at home, even if I had an oven big enough, it would stink out the home, so it's no good. And so that's sort of nowadays quite different. So, but it's taken time, and I think also when we first sent timber to Japan, we sort of shot ourselves in the foot by sort of sending wood that wasn't ready for sort of construction purposes. So we've learned the hard way. So let's not make the same mistakes. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, so many golden jandals in that, just that little bit there. We call them golden jandals these days. Okay. Yeah, I see it, golden nuggets. But we had a meeting, didn't we, in Tokyo not that long ago with the Native Sparkling Boys, and it was really interesting to see they're fresh on the ground. you and Catherine, very much more experienced in the business setting, how you laid your business cards out on the table that you'd received from the native boys. You'd laid them out in front of you so you knew who was who, and they'd put theirs away. And I said to them, do you see the difference here? And they were like, no. And it's like, look at what Catherine and Ian have done, and with their cards out on the table. Yeah. And they were like, oh, wow. And I was like, yeah, so this is important. And then Catherine explained, didn't you, how your little strategy for keeping people's names straight and who everybody is by keeping your business cards out on the table. Such a simple thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But we had this little business card etiquette thing in that meeting. That was really interesting for me to watch that.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing was, Ian's anecdote, the sporting anecdote, because it's not a meeting with Ian if you don't have a sporting anecdote. And it's the one about golf, and they're golf players, and they also, to your point about showing family albums, they showed videos here when they were here of them playing golf on the farm as their practice range. But you mentioned, they said, it all happens when you're about to kick off on the tee.
They were obsessed about, I need to look good for my tee shot.
Oh, is that what
Ian
it was?
said something else. But do you remember what you said, Ian?
I can't
you remember about it was like, no, it all happens on the green. The green is where.
Oh, yeah. I do remember that. Yeah. The meeting.
Tell us about that. It all happens on the green. It's not about the tee shot.
No, thank goodness. Yes, it does happen on the green. That was the story of I think it was an American negotiating with Japan, and the deal was pretty much done. And the key person on the American side had been a lawyer who had been very particular about each detail. But then the Japanese group noticed that when he marked his ball on the green, every time when he put the ball back, he put it back closer. And they thought, this is not good. We can't trust this guy. Yeah.
No way. And that is a really great point that you're making, that they're not just listening to your words, they're watching your behavior as well. Absolutely. Right? Watching your behavior. Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah. The other thing I would just recommend to anybody doing business with Japan, if they're having a meeting with the Japanese side, it might be that the most senior person is not an English speaker or not a confident English speaker. And they may well actually understand English probably much better than I would understand Japan, but they prefer not to speak. A tendency that I do notice on the New Zealand side is, in that case, to direct their comments to the English speaker, where they need to continue to direct their comments to the senior person on the Japanese side, because that's the counterpart. The English speaker is there to back up the senior person on the Japanese side, and it will be quite embarrassing to that person if the conversation just goes directly to the English speaker, because he won't want to reply, or he or she won't want to reply. They'll need to defer to the senior person. So I think just be conscious, because if you're having a meeting in New Zealand, all English speakers, whatever, you just directed your speaker down the bottom of the table, and how would that go? It wouldn't be good at all.
That's a really good advice, isn't it? Not just follow the language, but follow the seniority there, and make sure you're still talking to that person. The translation may come in from the side, but keep your eye on the main person who's going to be making the decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think also, Catherine, slow your language down and maybe repeat a little bit, because actually the non-Japanese speaker will probably be understanding just about everything. And on occasion they might be choosing not to speak English to give them time to think.
Yeah, exactly.
So don't assume that that person is not understanding, because they probably are.
Yeah.
Brilliant advice. Yes. Yeah. Anything that you would like to share about upcoming conference in Beppu, or anything else that the JNZBC has going on?
Look, I think the conference in Beppu is going to be really nice. There's a huge commitment on the Japanese side to make it a success. And there's also a change in emphasis, that it's not about individual company presentations. We've gone past company presentations. At one stage, it used to be in the sort of getting to know stage that we'd have companies A, B, and C sort of talk about what their business was, and et cetera, et cetera. We don't do that these days. And so the conference this time, following on from the last few years, is going to be very much about how can Japan and New Zealand be working more closely together? Where does our joint interest lie, and what can we bring to the table, especially in this rather troubled geopolitical environment that we all find ourselves these days? So I think it's going to be that sort of a conference. So, going back to your point about small business, it's not unfortunately going to be a conference where they might do a deal. But what I say to them is, it is going to be a conference where you might find yourself sitting alongside the chairperson or CEO of a major Japanese company, who you would have no opportunity at all to meet otherwise. And if you can have a conversation with them and build up a bit of rapport and exchange a name card, they can provide the introductions that will be invaluable to you. And they may not be in your specific area, but they can reach out to people that they know. So that's what I sort of was saying to the small companies alongside the big ones, that this is a conference that can really work for you in a good way.
Yeah. Brilliant. There you go. And that's often how the best things happen. You're sitting next to the person at a conference, in the aeroplane, at the waiting lounge, or somewhere like that. So please do not underestimate the value of sitting next to the person who's sitting next to your next opportunity.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Ian, any last words to wrap up?
No.
Are you done?
It's been good to talk with you. I know if my feeling is any sort of indicator of the others in the Business Council, we just can't wait to get back there. Just being able to talk today, they say, I've got to get back. And
we're looking forward to having you here. And so thank you again, Ian, for being such a successful Jandal in Japan. You own that now, and thank you for telling us all about your history, your story, and all those wonderful tips for success for other Jandals here. Thanks so much.
Real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a fantastic interview that was with Ian.
He's such a gem.
A total gem, like a mine of golden Jandals down. Yeah, oh my goodness.
Major download.
I love the stories from the olden days and that continuity across all those years since he first arrived in Japan. And there wasn't even a direct flight between New Zealand and Japan in those days.
Right, coming through
becoming and becoming the ambassador. And he happened to be the ambassador when 3/11 happened, which was a very significant event for Japan. Very tricky time to be ambassador here in Japan. Yeah, but he has maintained his connections with Japan. Some very amazing connections he has created over these years.
Right, the relationships. He doesn't just say it as a word. It really means something. That he's got extensive relationships back there. So it makes me think about, Jane, you and I, who we know now and who we're going to know in
who we're going to know in 20 years' time.
That will be the proof. Have we really established relationships with Japan? Because we've got them in another 20 years. I can certainly think of 20 years ago, people that I know now who I work with in Japan. So maybe, there is a lot of strength in that. And I'm looking forward to 20 years hence and see where we are.
Well, the Beppu conference sounds like it's going to be a good time.
It's going to be fun.
And you're going to be busy, aren't you? It sounds like you've been tapped on the shoulder for something to do there.
Well, yes, I was ready for it. But there we go. I hadn't heard it quite expressed in that way, but I like the idea that he's got for that opening, set the scene for the conference. And why not hear it from people who've been doing this and been in a relationship, a business relationship, a policy relationship, friendship, from way back, right? 50 years or so. I think that's a great idea. I love that idea. Thank you very much, Ian. We also got lots of other gems from what you spoke about.
That story about the robotics company. And so you don't have to be a massive company to join the JNZBC. You can be small and also benefit from like getting in the same room as some of these people who know everyone in the business world in Japan, for example. So that's a really great, very affordable organization to join. And let us know if you're coming to Beppu. We're planning to be there. We'd love to see you and catch up with our fellow Jandals and Jandals in Japan supporters if you happen to be coming over. That would be really great.
Yeah, I heard someone talk about this the other day, as on the bleeding edge of a relationship. And that means the next person, the next person, the next person, the next person. I kind of wasn't sure about the bleeding edge thing, the way to describe it, but what it meant is the distribution outside of the edge.
It's sort of like, okay.
Rippling out, right? And so it's the person who's next to that person, to that person, to that person. And that's where you need to really think about it with Japan, right? It's the person you sit next to who knows the person who knows the person. And it really matters here. So never, ever underestimate those things. I thought that was brilliant. Don't be transactional on the first meeting. Yes. Don't rush into business. It is going to be a long game. Take your time. Also, his tips, we talked about those, didn't we, on the business card side of things?
Yeah.
Spend a bit of time looking at the kanji. What does this mean? What is niigata? Niigata, have I said it right? Niigata, is it famous for what? Oh, they're famous for this. Those sorts of things. Yeah, small talk is not a waste of time at all. Brilliant, Ian.
Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to also say that sending a one-line email to hope that people are okay, remembering their part of the season that they're in at that time. Just I'm thinking of you kind of email never goes astray. So what a great thing to do.
Yeah, seasonal greetings, such a big thing in Japan.
We've talked about that a little bit on the show, right?
Yeah, but even like starting like, when you get those emails and it's like the first 3 lines is like getting through the seasonal greeting and I'm like, okay, where's information? Very important that a lot of thought and effort goes into seasonal greetings.
The last thing I wanted to say on the tips, really the really great one, I think, was, your product might be a whiz, as he called it. Your product might be a big booming product in New Zealand, but it may not be in Japan. Find out what they want. What are Japanese people looking for? Don't just sell them what you think you want to sell. Find out what they're looking for.
Yeah, that story about the lamb legs languishing at the bottom of the freezer can totally relate to that. Like, you can't bring your New Zealand lifestyle to Japan and just expect people to think it's great. It needs potentially some adjustments, right? So slice the lamb so that it's ready for people to use like they like it here, for example. Exactly. That would be one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I hope we will see lots of jandals in Beppu.
Let's hope so, because they heard it here. They can plan very quickly from now how to become a member and how to get themselves down there. I mean, you'd be silly not to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right. You think we should have like a Jandals meetup? Will we have time, do you think?
Of course
like
we will.
A Jandals,
of course.
Like I don't know.
We can do an afternoon tea or when they do the morning, we could do another thing somewhere along the lines.
Yeah,
maybe it's drinks. Something like that.
Something fun.
We'll find something.
Yeah, something that just popped into my head now, so I just thought I'd mention it. But yeah.
Brilliant. We're going to do it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Jane.
Okay, see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out our guests' links in the show notes.
This podcast is brought to you today by Catherine O'Connell Law and Pod Launch with Jane. If you have a great story you think should be on the show, come and find us on LinkedIn or Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.
Mata ne!